When it comes to conures, which species can you put together? We're going to talk about that. And I'm going to give you a little footage of some of my conures that are mixed together. Hey guys, I'm Kaylin, the author of The Parrot Bond and a couple other books. I will put a reel at the very end if you want to watch and see about several things about how to get involved with me, how I love my YouTube members, and the fact that I've coloring books. This here is a new addition to our flock. She's not a baby. This is a Timna African Gray. We have named her Gaia Bliss. And Gaia came from my daughter. Bliss came from one of my viewers. And what a fantastic name. I really love when you guys write to me. I don't have time to read all of it, and I've been sick, so reading it has been harder. But I really appreciate it. I read everything. I love my fans. I love my YouTube members. And I got my first fan mail, a postcard, which was awesome. Just absolutely awesome. Okay. Gaia is supposed to be a companion for our African Gray Hera because I can put them together. But what about conures? Because my mission is to help you, in this case, put birds together successfully so that you have a more blissful bond with your parrots and your parrots are happy and getting along. Putting parrots together, I think, is a really wonderful thing when you're doing it properly so that they have their mini flock within your home and you're a larger part of that flock. That's so important. It encourages well-being, and I think it is really fantastic to do. Now, when it comes to conures, you can't just throw them together, but let's talk about some basic guidelines about putting some conures together. Number one, when they're young, you can almost put anyone together. Number two, no matter who you put together, no matter when, no matter what, you always want to observe. And one thing that's hard to measure is you want to observe until you are so 1,000% positive that they get along, that they're bonded, and that they're not going to hurt each other. I'm going to say it's a feeling you get because you watch them and they're no longer at opposite sides of the cage, kind of giving each other a look. It's more like they're together and they're calm and comfortable. So let's take Gaia here as an example. If you get a good look at her, it's funny, her eyes are like perpetually, to me she perpetually looks a little like freaked out. But she does look a little freaked out. If she has that look, and that seems to be kind of her norm, so this is going to be hard for me to measure. If she looks like that, I'm going to be less inclined to put her in with Hera. If she looks like that when she's in with Hera, I'm going to be like, this isn't working. So you have to start to watch and read the body language of your conures. If your conures' feathers are fluffed up, if your conures are far away, if they're squawking at each other, if they're kind of going like this to each other, that's a fight. Whereas if they're beaking each other and kind of kissing and preening each other and they're calm, that's what we're after. So really learn to watch them. Now, let's say for the first 10 minutes you're watching intently and you're watching them and they're behaving wonderfully. Does that mean you're done? Does that mean you can walk away and leave them in the cage together? No. Number one, don't forget our rule of thumb, which is the minute there's a second parrot in the cage does need to be bigger. We need more room. And of course, as everyone says, because it's true, the more cage, the more space you can give your parrot, the better. One reason for that is, of course, especially a smaller parrot, they're very active. And that's not always true. It's not always that small ones are active and large ones are inactive. It's a rule of thumb kind of thing. It tends to be true. But it doesn't change the fact that they all need some space to move around. Without their ability to fly, they don't have a lot of activities. So you really do want to make that cage bigger if you have two, certainly if you have 3 or 4. I don't recommend 3. It's an odd number, and there's always an odd man out. With conures, I recommend 4 because they're going to pair up like that. Plenty of space for them to move around, plenty of space for them to get away from each other just in case they have to. While they're establishing the pecking order, while they're getting to know each other. With them, what becomes a flock, and this applies to you as a person who is not in the flock and who then becomes a flock member, what makes someone in the flock is someone they are really familiar with, they're really comfortable with, and they recognize it kind of like as part of their family. It's a part of their home. It's a part of where they live, and then they'll get comfortable and cuddle up to them as well. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes they just come together like glue or like magnets, and they're like this, and they're bonded. Other times I have a pair of very, very bonded green cheek conures who started like this for months. I had their cages side by side, but with space in between, and then I got their cages closer and closer. And as I got their cages closer, they were about as far as they could be, and then they started to move closer and closer to each other. And finally, when they were right next to each other in their own cages, I knew that I could start to put them together. And I put them together, and I watched them to make sure that they were okay. And this is not common, but it took months and months. One reason it took months is because they weren't babies. So I needed to really give them that time to get familiar, to not only create a bond, but to become their own little flock, which I'm also a part of, even though I don't live in the cage with them. And that's the beauty of it. If you spend time with your parrots, if you get to know them, if they are familiar with you, the more and more they are familiar with you, the more you can effortlessly be a part of their flock. So back to the conures. We have, when they're young, they're easier to put together. Number two, you always watch. Even after you watch and they look good and you walk away, you have to come back and just really make sure, or put them in cages side by side, like I said, so that you have no emergency vet visits, no one getting hurt, nothing that you want to avoid. Now, when it comes to those conures, generally speaking, conures tend to like conures, and generally speaking, yes, their first choice is their same species, but after that, they will get along. That's been my observation. I have never put a really big conure, and the biggest conure I've had is a golden conure. I've never put a golden conure with a small conure like a Puria conure. A Puria conure is a green cheek conure, a black cap conure, a crimson bellied conure, and those are the three that you're going to see in my video where they are all living together in a cage. It's a pretty nice double big cage, so it's pretty big, but I'm looking into the possibility of having like a bigger aviary built for them, because I want my birds to have that room to really move around and maybe even fly a little. What a novel concept. And flying 4 feet back and forth is fine. It's more like a jump, but if I can do more, I'm going to see if I can pull that off. So, generally speaking, even two green cheek conures you can't just throw together. I had given you my example of the two where it took months for them to come together. So don't make assumptions about how, where, or when you can put your conures together. You might want to start with some small cages. You can even, kind of get yourself like a hospital cage. We call a hospital cage a cage that we have set aside that is smaller, that we can throw a blanket over, that we can heat, and that we can get out of a draft and out of the, kind of like a hospital, just out of everything, and give them some peace and quiet in case your parrot is sick and you need a place for them to rest and recuperate. So, you could get a cage like that and put one of your parrots in there. You can even get two, because when you do put the parrots together in the new cage, the territory, the new cage, has to be neutral to everyone. In other words, we can't have this one in the hospital cage temporarily while they adjust, and this one's in the cage they're going to live in, and then this one joins this one, because now this one feels like his or her territory is being invaded, and this one is now under threat. On the contrary, when we go into a new cage together, they're both on neutral ground. They're way more likely to get along. They're way more likely to go, oh, look, the two of us are here in this space. We should become a flock. So you're more likely to be successful that way. So make sure that you introduce your parrots. But with the conures, like I said, generally speaking, they tend to get along. Generally speaking, what we want to match is, number one, species, like Purias with Purias, but even more specifically, if you can, green cheeks with green cheeks. And then number two, I also try to match that species and make sure, like Puria conures tend to get along with Puria conures. That's easier to put together than a Puria conure and a different kind of conure, although it can be done. The next thing you want to look at when you're matching those conure species is their size and temperament. In other words, generally speaking, they are all kind of the same temperament, but if we have a nice, mellow, for example, blue-throated conure, I wouldn't necessarily throw them in with a blue crown conure. The blue crown conure is a little bigger, they're a little louder. Blue throats tend to be more so quiet. So my first inclination wouldn't be to mix those species. Can it be done? I don't know. It depends on each individual parrot's temperament and personality. So you have to test and see. You test by putting them in a big space and seeing how they do together, or having them each in their own cage and seeing with their cages close together, not close enough so that they can hurt each other, close enough together, see how they interact. If they kind of seem to and be vocally, screaming at each other, that's not looking like a match. Maybe in time, if they're side by side, it'll work out. If they seem to just be quiet, hang out, want to connect with each other, that is more likely to work out, again, of course. So I would look to matching the sizes and the temperaments, like I was saying. Generally speaking, your smaller conures are going to get along with your smaller conures. So if you had a half moon conure or a peach-faced conure, could you put them with a green cheek? Probably. My first choice would still be to put 2 peach fronts with 2 green cheek conures, for example, and have 4 in a cage. Can you have 1 and 1 and only have 2? You can. And I think that putting 2 conures is a better match together than like a conure and a budgie. Is it possible to have a conure and a budgie? Anything's possible. Is it unlikely to work out? I don't know. It depends on those temperaments. I have some conures that there's no way it would work out. I wouldn't expect the budgie to survive, literally survive the first day. The conures are more aggressive, the budgies are not. So if we had a peach front and a green cheek, I think that's a better match. But the most ideal thing where your conures are going to be the happiest is if you had 2 peach fronts and 2 green cheeks, or 2 crimson bellies and 2 black caps. And so you'll notice in my video, you won't see the 2 crimson bellies, but there are 2. Most of the conures in that cage are, in fact, the Puria green cheek conures. That's Puria molinea. Look at me showing off my fancy, Latin, and their scientific name, which I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly. But, most of what I have is green cheeks in there, and the crimsons and the black cap do fine in there. But again, yes, my ideal is to have at least 2 of a species. They just do so much better. And again, though, conures do tend to get along with conures. So be patient, splurge, and maybe get at least 2 small cages in addition to their larger cage that they'll go in together. And chances are, when you see them behaving well, when you let them out and you let them go to a play area that's common space and they do well, then chances are they're telling you that it's going to be okay. But like I said, just keep your eye on them and watch to make sure. Once they're preening each other, once they're sleeping with each other, like if they take a nap and they're right next to each other, as conures like to do, chances are you're looking pretty darn good. They've established a good connection. Thank you for joining me in this blissful video. I really want you to make sure that you can get your conures together in a healthy way so that they are super happy and super healthy and no one gets hurt. And so that's really important. I hope I've helped you with that. This does apply to other parrot species. It applies, for example, to Amazons, but one of the things that happens is conures. There are over 50 species, same with Amazons. Whereas African grays, there's like 3 species. And I don't know, maybe that includes the Timnas. So a lot of parrots don't have as many species, and so mixing and matching them isn't quite the same. They're, I think I can put my Timna with my Congo, we'll see. But that's all the options, right? There's Timnas and there's Congos. And there's technically more than 1 species of Congo, but they're not very common, so we kind of talk about there just being 1 African gray Congo. And so it really depends, but with such a variety as conures, it's easy to mix them. With something like parrotlets, here in the US, I've only ever run into 2 species, and the second species I saw listing for them, and I didn't even see them in person. I usually only see 1 species of parrotlets, and mixing them with other birds is difficult. I don't do it. I'm happy to put them together. I have no problem with it. I have an aviary. I have 2 aviaries filled with parrotlets, but I don't mix other birds with my parrotlets. My Australians, I can mix. Budgies, cockatiels, the red rump. I haven't had any problems. They get along really well. My Princess of Wales or Princess Parrot, they do really well. But again, you have to kind of know your species. So I did speak specifically about conures, and so it does apply to conures. Like I said, it would apply to Amazons, but make sure you research if you have a different species, because I'm pointing out it doesn't apply to parrotlets. It doesn't apply to lovebirds. I don't find lovebirds are a little aggressive. So make sure you research so that you do put them together well. And now make sure that you watch the last reel with my books and other offerings.